Boom. We fly in. What up, y'all? We are back for another episode of In the Huddle. It is me, Jason Brown. Miles is here. We got Dave in the truck. We're going to talk about the press conference. We're going to talk about the combine, talk about Kirk, Zim, all kinds of stuff. So come on right back. We got the roll in, and then we'll have a little conversation. Talk to you soon.
Huddle around as Climbing the Pocket Network presents Jayson and the Boys talking everything Minnesota Vikings.
What's going on, y'all? We are live, and you are right. Tacos do bring a smile to everyone's face. What up, Nick? What up, Vikings Jerome? What up, Miles? How you doing, my man?
What up?
How you been?
Doing pretty good. You know, just living life, busy.
Word.
A lot of stuff going on, but
Word.
I feel like I'm not the only one feeling that way.
Yeah, I feel you on that one. You know, last week I got to meet in the flesh the man, the myth, the legend, the Flip Mozzie when I was out in California. It was a nice visit.
Yeah. That's
got
dope.
to catch up. See how Flip was living out there, balling in LA. You know, we're all trying to get like Flip. So nice to meet another member of the CTP fam in person. But let's jump in. You know, it's the off season. We're going to try to get right to it. And obviously the thing people are talking about today, Kwesi had his press conference at the combine. Miles, what were your big takeaways from it? How'd you feel he handled everything? Yeah. What are your impressions?
I feel like I don't want to keep discussing like the old regime and all that, but it's hard not to when it's so fresh. When you have a brand new regime and the old regime just left and they've been here for a long time, and it's hard not to always have those comparisons. But right now, I think we would have felt this with any new regime, but it just kind of does feel like a breath of fresh air. Like Kwesi talking to the media, like as a real conversation and taking real thought and respect and understanding into every question he gets. It's not just some half-assed answer. It's not just some, he provides some clarity onto why. Like he had a question about Kirk, and he said, "I want to give you more. Like I hate to give you a general answer, but there's only so much I can discuss here." Like those types of things. It just feels refreshing, and it feels like he's very much open to the idea that I think for one, he doesn't seem to be that great of a liar. So he tries to hold himself back, but at the same time, I kind of like that's he's not quite there yet, because it's nice to see some of the facial facial expressions and those types of things that he makes, and some of the body language, just to like you could tell that he's not quite there yet. And I like that. I like the natural aspect of that.
Yeah, it definitely felt like there was a level of authenticity, but also a level of respect in all of his interactions that were a bit different. Like you could tell, down the line, Zim would get a little gruff with the media. Like you could tell it was
Yeah.
a very adversarial sort of relationship for him when he was kind of interacting with the media. When Thomason was on, Vikings Happy Hour, and he was telling the story about Les Frazier taking the media out after he was fired, and then Zim just kind of like packing up and dipping. Like you could tell it was different. And it is interesting when like
Yeah.
Kwesi speaks to pretty much anyone. It just feels like there's just a level of respect there. It's not like, hey, I'm up here, I'm the GM, like kind of bow down to me sort of thing. It's like, you're here. You asked me a question, so I'm going to take some care and thought and like respect you enough to give you maybe not a fully honest answer, but at least a respectful, thoughtful answer, which was a nice thing to see. And some of those things as he was getting into it, obviously, like Vikings Jerome, thank you for teeing us up here, but Danielle Hunter was one of the first things people asked about in terms of like, is he going to be here? Is he going to be back? Kwesi talked about linking up with him and having some conversations about his future with the Vikings. I guess obviously they're not going to reveal very much in these sort of things, but I guess, did you take anything? Like you said, he's not all the way in there. He's not as great with the lying and kind of hiding things just yet. Was there anything that you took away from the way he talked about, Danielle, or really any of the other players?
Yeah. One thing I want to make note of, I don't want to turn this into a Kirk show because we've done that ad nauseum, but I think obviously he's a talking point, right? One thing I noticed, I'm trying to find the quote. Where did it go? Oh, there it is.
We're going to
So
do what's
one
best
thing
for
he
us?
mentioned
Kirk's
about
going to do what's best for him?
what well, yes, that part, I think I like that, like, honesty. But one thing that he mentioned about Danielle Hunter, he said he's someone that we'd like to work with moving forward. And now I only mention that quote because it's not that I don't think that they don't want to work with Kirk moving forward, but they haven't made that type of committal, open, like, statement about Kirk. They've talked about, oh, we're excited to work with Kirk. We're excited, like Kirk's here, he's under contract, like those things. And I think they're handling the Kirk situation as best they can right now, because as much as whatever fence people are on, whatever side of the fence people are on with Kirk, like nothing's set in stone with him yet. Like the only thing we do know is he's under contract, but like we don't know what the future is going to hold with him in Minnesota. We don't know if they're going to trade him. We don't like the only thing we know he won't happen to Kirk is he won't get cut. Like they can't cut him. So like that's the only thing that we know that can't happen. But we haven't heard this regime. Again, I still believe that they want to have a like get an extension done and do those things, but we haven't heard them come out and say we want to work with him moving forward as like this long-term building block to our team, to our new foundation, to our team. And I just thought that the way he phrased that quote was interesting because we just haven't heard that type of commitment to Kirk. And again, that doesn't mean it won't happen, doesn't mean it can't. I just thought that there's a little bit more of a definitive in that like phrase that we haven't heard. And maybe Hunter will get traded tomorrow, who knows? But like
And what were your thoughts? Because again, it's one of those things that's really honest, but that again, you don't usually hear GMs say it as directly. Is we're gonna do what's best for us, and Kirk is gonna do what's best for him. Just kind of laying it out there, and then again saying like, I feel like there's a lot of space in the middle where we can figure something out. And it seems as though, and Nick Olson and others have pointed out, like, and I think we've said it many times on the show, like Kirk is a very good quarterback.
Mhm.
Are there some things that he can work on? Are there some mental things that like can give you doubts? Yes, absolutely. But Kirk is a very good quarterback. Worse quarterbacks than Kirk have had success in the playoffs and won the Super Bowl. The issue has always been one of value. And so I'm really interested to see how this all plays out because Kwesi also mentioned his economics background, right? And he seems to really be taking a non-emotional look at this whole thing and really thinking about it in terms of value for the team to build a consistent long-term contender. That's a word that we've heard. That's a phrase, excuse me, that we've heard over and over and over and over again. It's not about next season. And that's something we've been screaming from the rooftops that we want to see from the Vikings for a long time, is like, stop thinking about next season. Think about how we can win consistently over the long term. And so it does very much seem that when Kwesi's thinking about things, it's like, yes, Kirk is good. If we have Kirk, we'll probably be a better football team next season. But also, like, I don't want to hamstring my team for the long term. And so, as like you said, they haven't been very committal to it. Do you think that's them just kind of posturing from a negotiation standpoint, and like they're going to work something else out? Or do you really think that there's like a real possibility that Kirk Cousins could be in a different jersey next year?
I think everything is on the table. I think if Kirk was willing to play ball and meet the Vikings halfway, you would hear more of a committal. Like if Kwesi felt that there was more of a middle ground to meet, you would hear more of that committal speak, because they would think, we'll find a way to get something done. As of now, like, again, this could change over the coming weeks. The new league year doesn't start for another couple of weeks. But as of now, it just feels like Kirk's set in what him and his reps are set in what they're looking for. And my assumption is, based off what you just said about creating sustained success, Kwesi came into a situation with a tough cap situation. The Vikings are like 15 plus over the cap right now. They're like 15 over the cap right now, and they have a lot of aging and expensive veterans, and so they have to be meticulous about the moves that they make with those guys to determine their path forward. And obviously, the two most important players right now in that instance are Kirk and Hunter. And so Kirk's number one because he's the guy that is going to take up the most amount of your cap space long term, whether whatever kind of extension, if that's possible, would look like. He's the most expensive player in your roster. So ideally, he's the person that's going to be the priority one, because you need to know what that path looks like so you can figure out which path you need to go down from there. From whatever happens with Kirk, what's the path moving forward? And so for me, that's why I talked about the lack of commitment, because until there is a true meeting in the middle, which I don't think we're going to see from Kirk's side, they might just have to. Again, that's why I think everything's on the table. I think Kwesi and KOC have done a good job of like to your point, he's a good quarterback. That can't be disputed. Kirk is a very good quarterback. He's not an elite quarterback. I think everybody understands that. There are limitations to his game, but the biggest hindrance of Kirk is his contract. I would say that more than anything else, it's the contract, and what kind of, not just the like numbers, it's the structure of the contract. If Kirk constantly wants 2 or 3 year deals that are fully guaranteed, that repositions him to be in this exact same position in 3 years, all that does is hurt the Vikings. And so unless he's willing to come off of that ledge to do that, I think Kwesi's not going to budge, because Kwesi understands he has to have some means of flexibility moving forward for this roster. Otherwise, he might end up in the same situation the old regime came into, but they had a longer leash. So like that's where I think
Myles,
the hope is.
Myles, I hate to cut you off here, but can we hit pause on the show real quick? Dave, can you just pull up the last quote from Jake Anderson? Any of the quotes from Jake Anderson. Shout out to the man, Jake. But just look at that. Look at Jake's Avi. Look at him in there looking like $1 million, just cheesing out there, living his best life. I just wanted everyone to just soak in the glory that is the homie Jake, looking good, living his best life. I'm sorry I cut you off, but like I was distracted by Jake just up there smiling at us while he was giving us those quotes. It's fire. It's fire.
No, I love it. No, that's great. No, that's great. And everybody in the comments is right. I think it's really, I will say it's really easy for us to make the like disconnect, or like find the disconnect and find the like finality of it. Like I think most people here would be okay almost any route that happens. I think I've kind of got to the point where I'm cool with whatever, unless it's that 3 years, $84 million fully guaranteed contract. Now, I know the number would be higher than that, but like if they do that again, I think that's where you'll see me start to backtrack a little bit. But if they find a way to do a reasonable extension with Kirk, I'll get on board because I can understand why they'd want to why they want him long term, and they'd want to start building out the roster and have an understanding of who their quarterback is. But right now, I don't think they can plan what the long term viewpoint of the quarterback is until they have some sort of final solution there, and we probably won't hear for a couple of weeks what that looks like.
All right, last question on the press conference. What were your thoughts on the way he spoke about, O'Connell and their relationship and how they're going to work together? And like, how does that make you feel about how things are going to move going forward? Obviously, it's the first season. The bullets really haven't started flying for them yet. They're not really like, there's pressure. There's always pressure, but it's not like, the real pressure just yet. Yes, what are your thoughts on it? And Jake, that was real. I gave you a shout out on Twitter. You're looking good. You're looking happy, man. That wasn't off the top rope. That was me just, giving you a shout out. You're out here. Most of the folks in the comments are anonymous, Jake. You're doing it and looking good while you're doing it. So, no shade whatsoever. Back to you, Myles. Kevin O'Connell. What are your thoughts on his relationship with Kwesi as spoken to by Kwesi?
I like hearing everything we've talked about with Kwesi, everything feels authentic. And I feel like his relationship with O'Connell is authentic. And I feel like they very much have on the same wavelength. Now, there's going to be disagreements. Like, I know everything right now is like the honeymoon period. There will be those periods where they butt heads. There'll be those periods where they don't agree on things. But I think the one thing that you'll understand that, again, going back to the previous regime, there isn't going to be that full on, we're not going to talk to each other for 3 months. We're just going to bash each other to the media type of involvement with each other. Like, they're not going to get to that point because they understand the importance of what's at hand. And I think they just have too much respect for each other. And so what I appreciate from that relationship so far is that they do very much feel like they're in lockstep with whatever decisions they're making moving forward and that vision for how to rebuild, retool, reset, however you want to say it, building a foundation of a roster. So, so I love that comment, and I love. It's been a short period of time, but you can already tell how much work they've put in over the last couple of weeks since O'Connell came into the building. Where they are, I know they're the last team in the league to have their head coach in place, and so they kind of got a little bit of a late start, but I think that's okay. I think they already had a lot of foundational stuff in place that helped that where they could have O'Connell hold off a little bit. So, but I love that they seem to be in lockstep with each other and with the direction of the team.
Yeah, and the thing that really stood out for me is Spielman and Zim. It just felt very much like it was a football only relationship. Like everything about when like Rick would talk about Zim was very much Zim, the football coach, the type of football guy that he was. And the thing that I'm appreciating is that it seems like an authentic, like human relationship first. Like obviously there's the football stuff, there's the work that they need to get done, but it seems like on a human level, they actually like one another. And it's a lot easier to go through hard shit when you like the people that you're working with. So like that in and of itself felt like just a difference, again, in the way that Kwesi was talking about things. He was talking about like people, not just like football guy pawns that you're going to move around in service of the end goal. And that sort of language and this talk of collaboration and how folks are going to work together, like that's kind of shown through in all of the interactions from all of the coaching hires, everyone that they brought in. Everyone has been on the same page in terms of like the type of environment that we're going to have and how folks are going to interact with one another. And so it'll be very interesting to see, like you said, when rough times hit, if they're able to actually, if they're able to actually keep this all going when times get a little tough.
Yeah. You hold on real quick. One last point on that. He had mentioned, someone had asked him about the hierarchy within the front office and how Ryan Grigson, the guy that they hired to be, I don't even know his exact role, but like it's a senior advisor within the front office that they brought over from Cleveland. I think everybody knows Grigson from his time with the Colts. Um, they asked about the hierarchy there. What I love from the answer from Kwesi that feels authentic. Again, this feels authentic. Everybody seems to be like they all know who's in charge, but they all seem to be on the same level. There's no like, hey, if you have an idea, you have a thought, you can't come to me and you can't mention it, and I'm just going to shoot it down. It feels like there's that level of respect across the board, where if anybody has something to say, it's going to be heard. And yes, it might not follow through, but like everybody will be heard. Everybody will have a say at the table, and then they'll make a collaborative decision. And how, again, Kwesi's that final decision maker, but they will have like a collaborative effort in decision making, and I thought that was something that sounds like it should hold true. Hearing him say that and the way he's spoken to the media so far, it kind of feels like that's not bullshit. And sometimes you can kind of read between the lines on some bullshit. And so, obviously, again, time will always tell. But as of now, that it feels like that's the approach. So I'm just excited to see that play itself out. But I'm also really curious to see what happens after the draft. I know we don't need to get too far down the weeds here, but Kwesi doesn't have all of his people in place in the front office. I think people need to understand that. Like, I think as fans, we have more access to what teams do and at every level than we ever have. Like, we know who these front office names are. Like, we don't need to know Ryan Grigson, like his role in the Vikings. Like, it doesn't matter. It shouldn't. But like, we care, right? Like, there are those roles within the front office that we seem to care about, that we think we know what the impact is. But like, and the scouts, and like we learned like Brzezinski, like we know all these names that we probably shouldn't have access to, but again, we do. I'm also excited to see a little bit more of like what areas does Kwesi think post draft does he need to bring in from his people, and like how many people does he feel he needs to bring in from the outside in to help rebuild his foundational front office.
Yeah, and it'll also be interesting to see like what areas, not just which people, but I think like which
Yeah.
areas he
Yep.
feels like he needs to bring people in will be really telling as well, to really give us a thought on like what he obviously right now everyone's saying all the nice things. Everyone's saying like, oh, great organization, this person, that person. But we'll start to see some of that real, like you said, when they have to start hiring folks and like, oh, okay, like they hired someone who does a similar job to that other person, or oh, it looks like they're trying
Right.
to beef up their analytics department, or oh wow, like they're really changing some things from a scouting department. That'll start to let us really know like, yeah, where the changes are, what the philosophy is going to look like. And so yeah, those are some interesting things that usually happen kind of after the draft, even that'll help us
Yeah.
understand kind of where we're at and what the team's really going to look like in the future years. So like that's a really great call out as well. um Coaching staff, it's finalized. I know we talked about a lot of these names already, but now that the coaching staff's all the way locked in, it's really in place. Anything else that you wanted to add on that in terms of what you're thinking about when you think about this coaching staff? I guess Dave, if you could just throw the graphic that has everybody up there, and I guess if there's anyone's names that stood out. I know that you called out last time that it looks like a staff that is committed to like player development, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Anything else now that like
Yeah.
the defensive staff is locked in and we're good to go?
Oh, should I go a full deep dive into the new inside linebackers coach or no?
I mean, I know
No,
I know you love that. I know you love it.
I do, but no. I like I said before, I think what you see is there is a lot of experience, but there's also a lot of opportunity, and I think that's what I'm most excited about. On Ed Donatel's side, on the defensive side, obviously Ed Donatel's been around a long time. There's Mike Pettin, who's the assistant head coach. I think he's going to bring a lot of senior leadership to the defensive side too, and bring that perspective. And then you have Greg Minuski. I don't know how to say his, but he's a former D coordinator, former, he's a longtime NFL coach. So they have a lot of experience within that room. And then you also have some younger people like Durante Jones, who was here in Minnesota and back in 2019 or 2020, excuse me, as a DB coach under Zim. Went to LSU to be their D coordinator. Then they got rid of their staff, so he's back in Minnesota as a DB coach. I'm excited to see. I think he's finally getting an opportunity to have a future in Minnesota, and maybe a future that provides more opportunities within the defensive structure and his responsibilities that I don't think Zim was giving any of his defensive assistants. So I'm hoping that there's an opportunity there for Durante Jones. Chris Rump, I think we've heard good things about him. So I like a little bit of the flavor that the defense has a lot of experience, but then they have a few coaches that are up and comers. And then you look at the offensive side of the ball. I think that's where there's a real opportunity. And this is the one part that the Vikings had a little bit of this on offense, fortunately, even though they had a lot of turnover at OC. But when you do have a head coach that's an offensive-minded coach, you might lose a Wes Phillips in a year or two, or a couple of years, because he's the OC of you hope to be a really good offense. But what they put in place was a lot of young but up and coming coaches that might be able to slide into that OC role in a couple of years. And so I'm excited to see how that plays out. And again, back to the player development part, I think the player development part is the key. Can some of these assistant coaches behind the scenes help develop some of the younger players that might not be getting as much playing time, but they're doing stuff on the practice field, in the weight rooms, and in the meeting rooms that can help speed up their learning curve to get on the field and have an impact earlier.
Yeah, and before this staff was finalized, I guess Dave, you can pull down the graphic. Before the staff was finalized in the early days, like there were a lot of rumors popping up, like this person, that person, and there was a bit of angst around like Vikings Twitter. If you hopped into Reddit or anything like that, people felt like, oh my God, like all the good coaches are gone. Our staff is going to be terrible. I wish we had this person or that person or that person. Now that the staff has been finalized, like how do you feel about it? And are you feeling good about this staff, or do you feel like, oh man, there's some names that got away that I would have rather had?
I mean, it's really hard to know, like especially position coaches. It's really hard to know actually how good some of those coaches actually are. Like all we really have to go off is, like the players that they've coached and see, and if those players have become good, then we think that those coaches are like up and coming or really good. But like, I think what I like about the coaching staff in itself is there's a variety, and I don't think KOC got every person he wanted to bring over. That's okay. I don't think every coach is going to get those opportunities where they get every single assistant coach that they want to get. Like we know he tried to go after one of the Rams DB assistants. It didn't happen. They got blocked. Like that's okay. They rerouted to Durante Jones. Like he's, from what we know, was seen as a good developer when he was here, a good coach. So someone else gets an opportunity, and I think that's okay. I think in the coaching ranks, you don't always get the coaches you want, but someone else gets an opportunity, maybe they'll step up. So it's really tough. I think on the defensive side, we have a good idea of the experience levels, and I think the experience levels is very important to the defensive side, so that KOC can kind of give them that freedom. But I'm hoping the offensive side can follow suit on that. But I think having O'Connell in place to set that infrastructure, and then Wes Phillips, who has a lot of experience as well, I think they're in good hands, at least in the short term. We'll see. But I do say that we need to like have a little bit of patience, because it's still super early. Like there's going to be growing pains. Like I know it feels like we're going to go out and be a playoff team, but like there's going to be growing pains, and that should be okay as long as you start seeing consistency, cohesion, and progress.
And so just to shout out a couple of the comments that we've had in here, shout out to Dinesh. Yes, I also agree that Myles is up and coming and could be climbing the NFL ranks. His takes are always on point. And so it's always nice when we get a show where it's just the two of us, where we get a bit more from Myles.
Thanks,
and he
Dinesh.
gets a bit more time on here. So shout out to Dinesh for calling out what we all know. Myles is the secret weapon up in here. And then Jeffrey asked us, are we going to be getting some of the JR draft takes this season, in draft season? Jeffrey, what I'll tell you is that we get JR draft takes on a daily basis. Will they show up on the podcast? Unlikely, unless anyone knows a great corporate lawyer who can maybe find a wiggle room in the contract that JR signed with ESPN. But we will get the takes that we can get from JR, and we will share the good word with you whenever we are allowed throughout all of draft season. And like Jake said, it is amazing to see our boy crushing it at life, living his dream over at ESPN,
Yep.
kicking it over there with Mel Kiper, Todd McShay, and just doing the damn thing. It brings us all the joy. When we initially started I Don't Hate Sam Bradford on Blogger, this was JR's goal. And so it's amazing to see him live in that. And yeah, we'll bring you the takes that we can. We just probably won't see his actual face here. Maybe we can get Dave to make a graphic of him when we're going to be kind of spitballing one of JR's take for it. Next thing, you said we're not going to make it a Kirk show, but since the last time we were on, there were a couple articles that came out. In one of the articles, it was basically saying that Zim was basically over Kirk. Kirk wasn't making enough plays, and Zim was trashing Kirk to the full coaching staff. But then there were also reports that came out that said that Kirk Cousins influenced the hiring of Kevin O'Connell. And so I guess, Myles, looking for your perspective here, because I know that you had thoughts on really both those things. I guess, what are your thoughts on the relationship with the outgoing coach and the fact that Kirk seems to have influence over the hiring of the incoming coach?
Well, so the first part, the Zim article from Shad Graff at The Athletic, I think we all kind of knew. I think secretly, whether secretly, openly, whatever, I think we all kind of had an understanding that Zim didn't like Kirk. We all knew that. It wasn't a surprise. The fact that it's coming out now is even less of a surprise, because all the tea is coming out, is being spilled out of the Vikings front office, and especially Zim since they left. Kind of funny that Rick has kind of gone unweathered since that firing. I know we've seen him out in public, and Zim's literally taken all the heat. And this is coming from someone that I've been out on Zim for a few years. I've been over his thing, his shtick, his kind of bullshit the last few years. I've been out on that for a while. But I think one thing that we need to understand is two parts here. Yes, Zim, it got tired. It got old. It got it was time to move on from Zim. You'll never hear me say otherwise. But Zim cannot be the only thing that was an issue with this team, because it's not true. I think it's funny that 6 months ago you would have saw so many people telling you to kick rocks if they wanted to move on from Zim, and then all of a sudden a few stories come out that means Zim's this really bad guy, this bad guy, that Zim's the root of all the problems. The Vikings are now fixed because Zim's gone. Those types of things just kind of rub me the wrong way. In the fact that, yes, I believe Zim was a big factor in some of the negativity and the issues that were happening within the team, and it got stale, it got old. The players seemed to be over it. The players are you would think players that have been with Zim for 5, 6, 7 years would have gotten a little bit more say and within some of what's going on in the locker room. Well, it didn't seem like Zim was having that. So I can understand those aspects of things, but Zim was still a good football coach. Now, I'm not a fan of the fact that it got out. I'm never a fan of some of this stuff getting out. It's really great that we get to hear it, because you'd love to get inside and to hear what happens. I'm not a fan of some of that stuff getting out, because I think, especially within a coaches meeting, if Zim's talking openly about Kirk, wasn't the only person that Zim talked openly negatively about. I guarantee that within coaching meetings. Maybe he took it over the top with Kirk, but Kirk wasn't the only one that got the wrath of Zim. But that stuff's not coming out. So just some of that stuff is a little where I struggle a little bit. But you also found out that there are some coaches that agree with Zim on the Kirk situation, but you don't know who those coaches are. Nobody mentioned them by name. So it's kind of funny that there's that whole thing. But the other part of that too is I think Zim's right. I thought Zim was right from the jump in 2018. He felt he saw the writing on the wall that if they spend too much at quarterback and they don't get enough return from quarterback, it's going to be harder to fill out the rest of the roster. And Zim foreshadowed that. And maybe it wasn't the exact way he envisioned it, but Zim foreshadowed exactly what Eric, friend of the show, Eric Eager mentioned is it's not that Kirk's not a good quarterback. It's not even that his market value is bad. It's when you're not making your team that much better to overcome the deficiencies elsewhere because you can't pay for it, it just makes the margin for error that much harder. So that's that part that I struggle with in the end. But yes, Timothy, I'm 100% agree. Zimmer got himself fired 100,000%. Like it's on Zimmer, especially the last 2 years. Like I have no issues with like ragging on Zim. I thought Zim should have been fired. Like I would have been okay moving on from Zim after 2019. But the other part of it was what was the other part, Jason? It was
Kirk influenced the head coaching hire.
The influence of the head coaching hire. So two things there too. So we heard from Patrick Peterson on his podcast that the ownership called in some of the players from leadership. I think it was the day after the day they fired Zim and Rick. I think that was the Monday after the season. And they kind of wanted to get their thoughts, their feedback into like how the team dynamic was from the leadership standpoint, from the locker room. They wanted to hear all that. And I think the players got to talk openly about that, and I think that's great. I don't want to I think it's being overstated too much, and probably for a reason that like Kirk is not the reason Kevin O'Connell is here. Like Kirk may have the Vikings went to Kirk and asked their thoughts on Kevin O'Connell 100,000%. They should. He's your quarterback. He's someone that is supposed to be the leader and the quote unquote face of your franchise. He's your highest paid player, and he's been here and he's worked with Kevin O'Connell. So to ask him what that experience was like for him makes all the sense in the world. Now, does that influence the final decision to hire him? No way. It might have like it just adds another check mark to like the resume that they're looking for a new head coach. That's great. But did they ask Delvin Tomlinson about Patrick Graham when he interviewed? Like he played with him in New York before he came to Minnesota. So it's like there's just like all these things. So yes, I believe that Kirk Cousins provided input on who he knows Kevin O'Connell to be from a player standpoint. Do I believe that that's the reason that Kevin O'Connell got the job or like completely influenced the decision? No, I don't.
What do you make of Kevin O'Connell's thoughts that at this stage in Kirk's career, they can help him be a better leader on offense and help him step more into that role? Because that was something that definitely jumped out at me because it seemed odd. It's not like Kirk is like Justin Fields going into year 2 or something. Like Kirk's a veteran who's been in the league for a while. So I just thought that was it was an interesting thing for the coach to say. I'm curious for your thoughts because Kwesi also had some things. Kirk can spin the ball, but he also talked a bit about on script, off script. Like when things are easy, Kirk will get everything that's there for you. When things break down, maybe he's not the guy for that. And so like O'Connell's comments, Kwesi's comments. I'm very curious on like your thoughts on Kirk turning into a different sort of leader at this stage in his career.
Yeah, I think the one thing about that is if somebody knows the type of person and the type of leader and type of quarterback Kirk Cousins is, it's Kevin O'Connell. He was his quarterback coach his last year in Washington before he came to Minnesota. So I think it says a lot about the fact that he knows what it's good that he like if Kirk is going to be here, he knows how he can get him to maybe not it's not Kirk directly connecting with the players. I guess his teammates, which I still think is very weird, but excuse me, what we've heard from about Kirk is Kirk's not that like build tight-knit relationships with his teammates. He's I come to work, I get my job, I do my job, and I go home to my family type of person. And it's hard to have that type of player at quarterback, that like mentality, but that's what we have, right? So I think in that instance, O'Connell saying I can help provide that like buffer or connection to the other players on the team that Zim clearly couldn't do. Zim couldn't be that in between, hey, let me have a relationship with the quarterback and then the rest of the team and kind of talk about how it all encompassing works together. So I think that's more of what he meant. And I think the relatability aspect of it, like Kirk doesn't relate to most of his teammates. I think that's fine. Like it's not the best thing, but it's not the worst thing either. Like it is what it is, right? Like you don't relate to all the people you work with. You don't relate to your boss or those things every like all the time. So it's finding that like middle ground of not like I remember in 2018. Remember the pregame like speeches that they tried to get Kirk to do. Like I don't
Whew.
think O'Connell's going to ask Kirk to do those types of things because that's just not who Kirk is, and I think that's okay. Kirk doesn't have to be the rah-rah guy, the guy that like has to pump up the team every week, but there needs to be a little bit of the like getting behind the quarterback. And I'm not saying players don't get behind Kirk, but Kirk's not the person to say, "Hey, jump on my back and let's go." But O'Connell's the type of coach to say, "Hey, let's jump on Kirk's back and let's ride because I'm going to be the one driving the bus." So I think it's about who's driving the bus. O'Connell, like a Sean McVay, like a Kyle Shanahan, is going to be the type of coach that likes to drive the bus. Now, Matthew Stafford came into LA and he started to drive alongside
Negative.
McVay.
Andrew, we do not want to see more of that. I just had we don't want more gritty.
We don't want to
Kirk.
see. We don't want to see gritty.
No more gritty from Kirk.
But like so you remember McVay with Goff. McVay with Goff was calling all the shots. McVay was the one driving the bus of that offense, literally telling Goff where to go with the football before the headset turned off. And Goff was a soldier doing the job that he was being told to do. Kirk, in a lot of ways, is like a significantly better Jared Goff. If you have a coach that can tell Kirk what to do with the ball, where to go, and like make his life easier in that way, he's a perfect soldier. He's the guy that comes to work, gets the job done, and goes home if you tell him and lead him where to go. And I think that's fine. Like, that's who Kirk is, and I think that's fine. Like, but if you brought in a guy like Kevin O'Connell to do that and you think you can get the most out of Kirk from that, fantastic. I would caution the fact that they tried to do it with Kubiak, and I think Gary Kubiak very much did a similar thing. I think Gary Kubiak did a really good job of leading the horse to water and making that job easier on the quarterback because he positioned the reads and he positioned the offense to fit that. And so I think O'Connell can do a very similar thing. I think Stefanski too, I should say, in 2019 as well. I think O'Connell can do a very similar thing to where he can lead the horse to water and then the horse just needs to drink.
I mean, that is Kirk. Baker versus Chef. All right. Eric's article, we talked about that a little bit there. The Combine, it's coming up, and this is kind of the point in the offseason when we as NFL fans start to get excited again because, like, there's people doing football sort of things. The league is all together, and rumors start to come out. And I'm curious for your take on the Combine. Like, are you still as pumped, still as excited about it? Because I know that we were talking about that article that talked about how, like, the Rams don't send, like, the top of their kind of brain trust to the Combine in the ways that they have in times past because they feel like they can get a lot of that information through other means. And so I'm curious for your thoughts. Like, are you as into the Combine as you have been previously? Like, and what are your thoughts on how the Vikings should or will kind of go about things as we get back into kind of the off season?
So I'm still into it. I love it. I think it's fun. I especially the skill players on both sides of the ball. I don't really think it's all that fun to watch linemen run around, but like it's not designed for them, right? It's not.
Sorry, Dave.
But I do enjoy it. Sorry, Dave. But I do like. I do really like the Combine and for what it is. I do say though, the one thing that we overstate with the Combine is how much it actually impacts teams' boards, like their draft boards. Teams know, like to your point, Jason, teams know a lot of this information about players. Like there's now GPS tracking on in college football. So like teams can have a good idea of how fast a player actually is on the field heading into the combine that they didn't have before. So that information means that their 40 time might have some means of an impact, but you know how fast they are on the football field playing the game. And that in itself is more important than the 40 time you see someone try to get into in a track stance that they rarely ever do on a football field. So I think those types of things that us as fans will start to like say, oh, X player, they ran this 40, they had this, these agility drills and they scored these. That means they went from being a second round pick to a first round pick. Like a lot of teams might have already had those players in that position already. This is just more confirming some of the information that they and affirming some of the information that they already assumed or had seen previously.
Yeah, that's a really great call. And Jonas called it out in terms of the thing that I think that like I also am probably most excited about is the rumors that start to come out around the combine.
Yeah.
Because you get all of the NFL
Yep.
together, all the media together, guys are going out, having some drinks, doing those sorts of things, and things start to come out. And Judd has been, there's been a lot of smoke around, maybe us getting some help on the offensive line from Judd talking about Brandon Scherf wanting to come back closer to home. I guess, what are your thoughts on that? And have there been any other rumors that have that you've seen or that maybe you're expecting to come out, now that folks are together and talking football again? Did I lose you, Myles?
Yeah. Oh, my bad.
Oh.
My bad. You repeat it?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, any rumors that are bubbling up that have you excited about the direction the Vikings might go? We're being linked to, I think, every big interior offensive lineman that pops up. So I'm curious if there's anything that's popped up that you've heard of or anything that's making you excited about the moves or the direction that the Vikings might go in.
I actually think I love that we don't know. For so long, we kind of always had an idea of what heading into the combine, what the direction was going to be. Now we have an idea of some of the outs, like the major holes that the team needs to fill, and so that you can use as an assumption heading into the combine of where they might go. But we don't fully know right now what their plan is, and they obviously need to free up cap space. How are they going to do that? What holes are they going to then create by opening up cap space that they need to refill that they need to fill? But honestly, talking about the interior offensive line, the one thing that I wouldn't be surprised about, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't make some major move at the offensive line this offseason. I know it would drive fans nuts, but like a guy like Wyatt Davis they might give him like maybe they'll bring in a cheaper vet as depth and competition, but maybe Wyatt Davis actually gets a shot to be the starting right guard. They already have Brian O'Neill and Christian Darrisaw in place. They got Ezra Cleveland at left guard. And lastly, I would not be surprised if Garrett Bradbury got first crack at the center position this year. I wouldn't be surprised at all. He's in the last year of his rookie deal. There's a skill set there that you can work with, and so I wouldn't be surprised if the new offensive line coach would be eager and willing to see if he can make that work. You have him under contract. He's not that expensive, but like he's a guy that there is draft pedigree there, whether he should have been drafted there or not, there is. So maybe the new coach thinks, hey, maybe I can get the most out of Garrett Bradbury that the old offensive line coach couldn't. That doesn't mean they won't bring in competition. Maybe they will bring in somebody to supersede to take over his spot. Who knows? But I just wouldn't be surprised if the offensive line isn't like a Brandon Scherf or some of these other high-priced offensive guards or centers. I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings stayed away because of all the other holes that they have at places like cornerback, edge, safety, potentially safety, linebacker, like those types of
Cornerback
things.
again.
D-line. Yeah, cornerback 3 times over. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if the offensive line just didn't really become too much of a factor this year, which might be okay depending on which might be okay depending on who they brought in. Like maybe they bring in a decent but cheap veteran that is fine. Like I think depending on who's available.
All right, last question for you before we get up out of here. Our friend Eric basically said that we're all looking at things wrong when we're thinking about the real upside to having O'Connell come in here as an offensive guy with this great staff that he's put together. Eric's perspective on this is that get a cheap quarterback, let O'Connell basically juice that quarterback's performance, and then max out the rest of the team and see where you can
Mm-hmm.
go. So, curious for your perspective on that play versus the maybe have O'Connell take Kirk from playing like a top 10 quarterback to maybe a top 5-ish type quarterback, and which thing you think would be better for the team as we're thinking about roster construction, team building here.
Well, when you talk about team building and roster construction, you talk about margin for error. And so when you don't have cap space or you don't have like draft capital and equity that you can build to fix some of those areas, which the Vikings don't have much of either, you need to find areas that you can create that larger margin for error. And obviously quarterback's the number one thing that can do that, because you either have, if you have an elite player, he can help, cover up for the deficiencies in other areas, or you have a quarterback that's somewhat cheap that you can then build some of those other inefficient areas that the quarterback might not be able to cover up for, because you've paid for it, you have with draft capital, you've been able to build up the roster in other areas to help that player. And so I'm with Eric in that, like, you brought Kevin O'Connell here because he can help bring the most out of a quarterback, but the margin that you'd be getting from an expensive Kirk Cousins with Kevin O'Connell, but less elsewhere, is not going to be that much higher than what we've seen over the last 4 years. It really isn't. There might be a tad more consistency, but in general, Kirk's been a fairly consistent quarterback. So in my opinion, I think, for me, the idea for me would be about going and getting cheaper at quarterback and building everywhere else so that you can focus on building a foundational roster. And if whatever quarterback you bring in that ends up being cheaper, if they don't pan out, you have room to fit another quarterback in place because you've started to build the rest of that foundation elsewhere.
Word. Well, that is it. And is that still the case? I'll have to go look it up. I know that it was the case last year where defense, we were spending more and it was still terrible. But I feel like all of those, not all, a lot of those players are now free agents. And so we got to figure things out to just be able to field the defense in the first place. But yeah, that's it. Y'all, thanks for coming through and rocking with us. It's nice to be on. It is the off season, so we're doing every other week until things really get going towards draft time. So thanks as always for coming through. Shout out to all the listeners, to all the viewers who are in here chopping it up with us in the comments. Obviously, there's some familiar faces. We got some new faces in here as well. Dinesh, you should know Eric. He's our man from Pro Football Focus, one of their executives. He's been rocking with us since the very, very beginning. But now that he's big time, we can get him in here when we can get him in here. And that's not all the time. But all of y'all, thank you so much for coming through. Myles, as always, it is a pleasure. The folks are loving you. If you haven't already,
I appreciate
subscribe,
it, everybody, really do.
Ring the bell, tell your friends to do likewise. And yeah, we will be back. Jonas is in the comments. You'll be seeing him throughout the offseason, bringing that heat, talking about the Vikings. And Dave, talk to the people. What's cracking for the rest of the week?
Tomorrow night on Vikings Happy Hour, we have Mr. Gessling of the Star Tribune, and he is going to be our guest, drinking beer or alcohol of some sort and having a good time talking about what he is hearing in Indy. And I think he's actually in Indy when Matt got him to agree to come on. So this should be fun. Thursday night, we have the great Flip Maze and Eric Thompson.
He's back.
Daily Norseman. It's a full week of Climbing the Pocket. And then, of course, on Saturday, you have myself and Darren Campbell. The other Canadian in the group, Jayson being the first and original one, who will wrap things up and start next week all at the same time.
Boom. We love it. Well, as always, we love all of y'all. Thanks for coming through. And Dave, play the music.
Skol Vikings! Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you're listening on your favorite aggregator, make sure you rate us. And always feel free to join the conversation here at Climbing the Pocket.
Skol, everybody.